Hi, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with AvaTax. I'm Ted Spence. I'm the director of the AvaTax API team. I've got with me here some team members from our developer support organization. I'd like to introduce you to some people you may have met before on previous calls. First of all, we've got John Horsely. John has a long history here at Avalara. He's been working with a huge variety of customers. He brings great background with Avalara. John, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So John is also no stranger to hosting these sorts of things. I hear you run your own podcast as well.
I do, about comic books.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So Infinity Wars, no spoilers today, right?
No spoilers. I'll try.
All right. We've also got with us Wayne Myer. Wayne, great dev.team member. He also lives on a boat. Wayne.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Ted. Happy to be here.
So actually, I forgot. Are you actually moving off of the boat, or are you helping somebody else move today?
My girlfriend moved onto the boat with me yesterday.
Oh, awesome. Crazy. And we've got Han Bao. Han comes to us from Code Fellows, and he's part of our intern project, and he's been helping with a variety of SDKs, right, Han?
Yes.
Cool. Welcome. What crazy thing did you do this past weekend?
This past weekend, I watched the Infinity War too.
Okay, good. Well, a couple of us can talk about it then. Hey, so welcome everyone. We've got 1 week until Crush DC, but today we're going to talk about one of the biggest topics that a lot of customers want to chat about, which is about calculating tax offline. So we'd like to dig into this problem because this is really a common question from everyone that I hear. I mean, Wayne, John, I don't know if you guys get this call quite as often as I do. Maybe it's just that all of the people who ask this question get escalated to me.
This has actually been a pretty salient topic for us lately, internally and externally, on how to have resiliency in your AvaTax integration.
Yeah, so we realized this last year when we were writing the developer guide, and we decided that we needed to make it an entire chapter, that this had to be one of the most important things that we talk about because everyone seems to care about it. You know, the AvaTax API is up there, and it's working, and you can call it, and you can get your tax results, but what happens if your internet connection goes down? What happens if your ISP breaks? Or what happens if the response comes back, it just doesn't come back fast enough? You know, we've had a couple of interesting occurrences recently where I mentioned ISPs, but I can't name by name. We had a major backbone provider that just basically rebooted one of the routers. I don't know the exact explanation for it, but like one router that serviced one connection to Avalara just stopped routing traffic. And for a period of an hour or two, we had a large variety of really angry customers that thought that Avalara was down. But as it turns out that they were just unfortunately connecting to us through this particular backbone provider. So like we spend a lot of time trying to deal with these random and rare occurrences. So, you know, Wayne, what do you tell people when they say, like, how often is AvaTax up or down? How do you respond to them?
I generally trot out that we have a certain amount of service level agreement. If you need a higher level service level agreement, talk to your account representative. And, you know, we have, if you need guaranteed uptime, we do have solutions for that, like,
could I ask, since you're sharing the screen today, would you be willing to show the status page while we're chatting about this?
Sure. And that is...
So, I mean, not meaning to put you on the spot, but like this status page is also another thing that I'd like to highlight to everyone. You know, we track AvaTax status continuously, and we have a highly talented 24/7 team of engineers that will keep track of whether AvaTax is functioning. And if you see on this page, you can expand the little checkbox next to Avalara AvaTax, and you can see the status reports for each service. So these pages will update whenever the service has an issue. If you look at this, our actual uptime is pretty high. Like, we don't have very much downtime. However, there's a lot of different reasons why customers could have an outage. And part of what we do, let's go back to the documentation. First thing that's really critical is, how does a customer know that there's an outage? I mean, John, you get calls from people all the time. How do most customers realize that something's happening?
Usually it's because they get an error message in their software or tax isn't coming back? Usually it's because something says connection failed or something along the lines of not getting tax.
So connection failed, that's a big thing. But you know what? A lot of people, they get so used to the fact that this software is up 24/7. They see that it's up and they just don't have a problem and they don't have a problem. So people don't often check for how do you find out if something is down. So can you click on the next page, Wayne, to detecting a dropped connection? So we specifically put a feature in AvaTax to help you test your code for this. And specifically, we want people to have the ability to call AvaTax and simulate an outage. This allows people to test their code and make sure that their code is properly detecting an outage. I will tell you, I talked to a customer a while ago. This poor customer was using a third-party software package. The third-party software package froze for 10 minutes at a time every time it couldn't reach AvaTax.
That's pretty devastating.
It's very devastating, especially because this was an integration into their order processing system. So one day, a backhoe cut the ISP cable out of their office. And even though their account system and their check writing system and their order processing system was all local within their office, every time they wrote an order, it would attempt to call AvaTax. The bits would fall out of this broken cable onto the dirt somewhere, and their system would seize up for 10 minutes and then time out.
That is horrible.
Backhoe correction algorithm?
Yeah, basically. So really, here's the thing: is you can't always anticipate what's going to go wrong. There are literal things that can happen when a dude with a shovel or a backhoe cuts a cable. We wanted to give you a way to simulate this and to say what's actually going to happen in this circumstance. So if you can scroll down just a little bit farther, Wayne, there is a section where we talk about forced timeout. Yeah, there you go, at the bottom of this page right here. We allow you to specify a parameter on the API call called forced timeout. And when you specify that, AvaTax will just sleep for 30 seconds instead of giving you a tax calculation. And you can use that to test to see what does your code do if this thing freezes up.
Is that forced timeout feature in Sandbox and production?
It's available everywhere. And in fact, we'd love for you to use it because this is a really critical capability. We want our customers to be able to write resilient code, and we don't want you to have to just hope that things will work when tests go wrong. So let's actually give an example of this. Can we pop over to the developer page for create transaction? What we're going to do right now is we're going to show how you can pass in a regular transaction and then how you can pass in a forced timeout. So just for simplicity's sake, we're going to use the basic API that everybody uses, which is create transaction. So if you go to try it now and you click sample data, this is a basic transaction. Everything looks pretty much normal. You can go ahead and click submit. You'll get a response in about, it's pretty quick. You can't even really tell. I mean, on the server side, we can tell you that this takes about 40 to 60 milliseconds, depending upon a variety of things. But, you know, it's so fast that you won't even think about it. If you just keep hitting this button over and over, it'll keep submitting, it'll keep processing. You'll hardly even notice it's happening. However, if you do this, what's going to happen is you're not going to realize that it could occasionally time out. So that's why we added the forced timeout feature. Why don't you hover over the little blue information icon next to the include box on the left-hand side? I think it actually says, well, it doesn't give the list of all the options. But here's where you can specify forced timeout. So let's go ahead and add that, and let's see what happens. It's just forced timeout. It's not forced timeout equals true.
Okay.
So go ahead and click submit now, and let's see what happens. Well, you notice all of a sudden it's taking a lot longer. And this is where I'll tell Han, we know on the dev.dot side, the dev.dot side automatically halts any API call that lasts longer than, I think it's 2 seconds. And really, that's best practices. That's what we encourage our customers to do. Actually, Han, now that I'm noticing this, we should probably have the dev.dot site say, this API call was terminated for taking too long, rather than just putting the empty page there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So basically what happened here is we've just simulated what happens if your network connection gets disrupted.
That's really good. It's awesome.
So like the important thing here is we want people to be able to test this, and we want people to be able to write code that handles this circumstance. So like, John, what's a good step to take if you detect a timeout?
What's the time we want to check to make sure you can actually get to the service?
Mm-hmm.
If the service is up, if the websites are up, if you can actually, what I usually do, what I tell customers to do is if they can get to the admin console or to our main service, then we can rule out other possibilities after that.
That's a good point. Just checking to see if the service is up. That's a really good point. So we have an API called Ping, which is a great way to just check connectivity. And you can use that API call because it doesn't involve anything else. It's not going to break if you have security permissions. It's just going to say, yes, you can return the service. You can reach the AvaTax service. So the only nuisance there is that a customer might not actually want to call Ping in the midst of trying to handle a customer request, because we might be in the midst of handling a shopping cart, right? So, what's a good step to take there? Let's go ahead to the next page of the dev guide, which is called retry or fallback. Kind of what we talk about here is like, what is the decision to take? I mean, like if you were building a shopping cart for someone, like would you want, like, what's the best practice there? I'm opening this up to the room. Like, what do you think would be the best response? If you were building Amazon, Wayne, what would you do?
In general, depending if the first transaction failed, when I've implemented shopping carts in the past,
mm-hmm.
and I was using other third-party services inside the shopping cart, depending on how it failed, if
mm-hmm.
it was, if I hit the full 2,000 milliseconds,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't retry. But or I would retry once, or if I didn't get an error message, there was a whole bunch of if this, then that.
Yeah, that's a pretty sensible thing. So let's actually focus on the first thing you said there, which was retry. So is it safe to retry? So part of what we talk about here on this page is how do we make it safe to retry? Because if your first call times out, well, maybe it never got to the server. Maybe your API call maybe the bits dropped out of the backhoe or something like that. But on the other hand, like maybe it actually got to the server and you never got the response, right? Well, if that was the case, wouldn't a transaction be created already?
Yeah.
So that could be a problem. You don't want two different transactions of the same thing, right?
Right.
So, John, could you try explaining to everyone what the create or adjust API call does? Not really. Okay. Well, so this is something that we added in REST a little while ago. I suppose we haven't really taught everyone about it, but the idea of this is that this is what's called an upsert, or an idempotent API. The API will guarantee to always either create the transaction if it does not exist, or it will update the transaction if it does exist. And in Avalara language, that's called adjusting a transaction. So if you make an API call, the best thing to do is to call create or adjust. Calling create or adjust will allow you to retry, because if the first call fails, you don't know whether it got to the server or not. And by using create or adjust, it will make sure that the second call will succeed.
How does it do that, Ted?
Well, actually what we do is when you make that call, we simply check to see if the transaction exists on the server side. We actually check to see if it got written to the data store, and if it did get written to the data store, then we will update it. If it did not get written to the data store, then we will just create it in the first place. So all of a sudden, you've got a circumstance where that transaction is going to exist regardless of what happened the first time around. Now, this is important. Like, the next thing you have to remember is you can't make those two API calls with random goods, right? Because then each of those random goods will both separately exist. So you have to pick a single doc code, and you have to call create or adjust twice, and that will allow you to do a retry. So putting that together, Wayne, I'd say that the answer would be, if you decide to retry, pick a sensible threshold, say 2,000 milliseconds. Call create or adjust. If that call fails, then the next thing that you want to do is halt that call at 2,000 milliseconds, make the exact same API call with the exact same doc code to create or adjust, and give that second thing 2,000 milliseconds. So if you do that, now you've just spent 4,000 milliseconds waiting for the API call to return. Now it's still a short enough period of time that most people won't have canceled their order, but if you don't actually get a response, or if you need a response faster, the next thing that you need is you need a way to fall back, right? You need a way to have a default tax rate that you can use. So what did you guys use for default tax rates? Did you just download a tax table somewhere?
We have tax tables APIs. That's another one of the suggestions that we're floating on how to build resiliency in clients that we're talking to in their new integrations. If need be, you fall back on tax tables, although we're kind of moving away from that suggestion because tax tables are a little annoying and complex, and you might not get the highest accuracy. And actually 11.4 in the developer guide would be to store the transaction and reconcile later. But AvaTax does allow you to grab the tables for your items that you sell for locations that you're selling to.
Yeah, so I've just, can I ping you to go over to the tax rates download page? So we have an API that will give you a nice basic tax rate for different postal codes around the country. And that's a pretty sensible thing to start with. It will give you a good default for tax calculation in a variety of zip codes. But the next thing to look at is, if you've got this, how do you deal with it after the fact? Well, let's say you used an offline tax rate calculation. Let's say you used 7%. And then later on you reconcile the transaction and you discover that the correct tax rate is 6.75%. Well, I mean, just speaking from a tax professional's perspective, does anyone know what you're going to do in a situation like that?
Depends on how late, how you fell in the filing, in your filing calendar, right?
Yeah, well, hopefully everyone is following best practices and reporting their transactions in the filing period when they occurred. If you're backdating transactions, you are going to have a lot of other problems too. But if you make the transaction today and you discover tomorrow that the rate is a little bit different, you've got a couple of different options, right? First of all, some companies hold open their credit card authorizations for a period of time to allow them to reconcile things. And this will allow them to correct shipping cost calculations or tax cost calculations or availability issues. So I know there are some stores that will send me a message afterwards and say, we're sorry, this is out of stock. We've automatically removed it from your order. And because they held the credit card authorization open, it's not a big deal. It's a little bit annoying. My item will be delayed a little bit, but at least then I'm only being charged for what I paid for, right?
Right.
So on the other hand, if you've already made the purchase, if you've already charged the customer their money, what are you going to do next? Well, the answer is, if you over-collect, it's your responsibility to remit exactly what you collected. So as Wayne was saying earlier, if you go to that next page in the dev guide, we talk about how to reconcile the transactions and record your amounts. So I do want to point out here, I've spent a lot of time talking. We also have Jeff Meisner here from the marketing team. Jeff has been managing the questions and answer, and I think we may have actually gotten a question on the conversation here. But if anyone does have questions, please feel free to speak up. It'll help interrupt me, otherwise I'll just be giving gigantic speeches for 30 minutes, right? Jeff, do we have a question?
Yeah, we do. How often should I download my offline tax content?
Yeah, okay, so I think perhaps what this is talking about is about the postal code rate table that Wayne just showed on the developer site. Now, that postal code rate table is updated daily, and every single day we'll recalculate it. That means that if there's a sales tax holiday, there's a lot of states that do back-to-school sales tax holidays during the summer. So that daily update process will help you keep everything in sync. So if you wanted to, you could set your service to automatically download once per day and just keep the most current rates available. The good news is that if for whatever reason your automatic daily process, is running behind, generally tax rates don't change on a day-to-day basis. They generally change on a month-to-month basis, right? I mean, John, you've been around for a long time. This is basically.
Yeah, 99 times out of 100, it's month to month. There's a rare case where it'd be, a mid-month update, but you're very much safe doing it month to month because that's when they update.
Yeah. So really what I'd say is setting it up for a daily process it's best practice because it means you've got a chance every day to correct any discrepancies. I've known circumstances where we've had emergency rate changes. I remember once the state of Puerto Rico faxed us something with 2 days notice saying they were changing all of their rates.
Yeah, I remember that too. That's insane. 2 days notice to get it all in.
Yeah, and we had to actually build 17 new tax forms that day in order to handle their filing cycle. It was pretty immense.
Pretty busy day.
Yeah, so just making sure to reconcile daily will eliminate a lot of core problems there. So that would be my recommendation. Of course, if your tax professional suggests that you do it differently, I'd suggest listening to them, but you've got my advice. All right, so Wayne, you were also mentioning it's possible to get customer-specific offline tax content, right? Can you explain that?
Customer specific?
Yeah.
I
think you were meaning the build tax content file, right?
I don't know. Actually,
So this TaxContent API is actually customer specific, the one that you're looking at right now. So if you call build tax content file, which is the other major API in this process, let me just send you the link for that to display. So the tax content file API will give you content that is customized for your business. And that API, there you go, yeah, perfect. So this API will actually give you tax rates that are specific for all the products you sell and all of the locations where you do business. And this is really powerful. This was designed for a customer of ours that has retail locations around the United States. And their retail locations will generally use slightly less expensive internet connections, which mean that if the internet connections go down, it could be an hour or two until somebody repairs them. They're not going to pay the 10x, 100x markup for business services. They're just small kiosks, and those small kiosks use consumer-grade Wi-Fi or like mobile hotspot sort of internet connections. That saves them a ton of money, but at the same time, it means that there can be intermittent disruptions. So what they do is they build a tax content file every day when they start up that lists the tax rates for all of their different types of products. And then they use that rate information for each of their individual locations. And there's one API right here which builds it for all locations. Could you click on the second API, which is build tax content file for single location? There you go. So this one I think is really convenient. If you're designing a cash register, this is the best thing to do. Build your cash register so that on startup, it gives its location, it gets its data, boom, there you go, you're ready to calculate taxes. So I think this is the best way to get started for offline tax content.
What are the advantages of that?
Well, what this does that the tax rates by postal code does not do is this API uses your items system. So if you've kept track of all of the items that you sell, each item has a different tax code, and those tax codes have different tax rates in different jurisdictions. So what we're doing there is we're actually giving you, here are all of the specific tax rates. If you sell snack foods, if you sell sodas, if you sell, the the thing my daughter is totally addicted to right now is those little loot boxes that they sell over the counter. John's nodding. He knows what I'm talking about.
I bought 6 of them over the weekend for my 2 daughters.
Oh my goodness, and they're all just tiny little plastic toys
Yep.
in cardboard boxes, and she spends $6-7 on each of them.
Same, yeah, all the time.
It's madness. But anyway, so those loot boxes, those are just general TPP, tangible personal property. So you have a variety of different tax codes, and if you download this API, if you use this API, you'll get different rates for each type of content, and you'll be able to give the correct tax rates for each different thing.
Do you need a tax code for everything in the loot box?
Well, I don't know what's in the loot boxes most of the time, but they're generally just little plastic tchotchkes, aren't they?
Yeah, usually.
Jeff, did I hear there's something else on the line?
Yeah, there's another question. What if I want to ship something to someone?
Oh, yeah. So this API that you're looking at right here is very specifically over-the-counter retail sales. So the customers who use this, they have physical points of presence, and they are directly handing over a good from the seller to the buyer. If you're actually going to take an order and ship it, I would really encourage that you need to call AvaTax directly for that. You could use the tax rates by postal code system, but the risk of over collection or under collection is significantly greater there. So you've got the option. We will help you do it, but we really need a way to just remind everyone that AvaTax exists for a reason. We spend a lot of time and effort coming up with accuracy for these features, specifically because we want this to be something that people get good and accurate results with. So retail sales directly handing over the counter, you can actually simulate those with great accuracy for offline circumstances. On the other hand, shipments, much harder. So I would really encourage you, if you're offline and you're doing a shipment, make that sale provisional and then wait until you're online and then recalculate the tax, because that will just give you the greatest possible accuracy. And so that's why, I hope some companies will keep the credit card authorization open and reconcile as soon as they get final results. All right, so with that, oh geez, I've still got another minute or two left. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah. How do I handle a refund offline?
Yikes. That's not fun, is it?
No.
Well, because what's the goal of giving a refund, right?
To give back the tax and the money.
So, what happens if you can't look up the original transaction? How are you knowing that you're giving them back the exact amount that they gave you?
That's a good question.
Because, what happens if what would have happened if I calculated $10 of tax, and then I, checked the rate, and the rate would have given me $9.99. Well, all right, there's a penny there. Penny is probably not going to make anyone that upset, but in the long run, you really want to give people back exactly what they gave you, right?
Right.
So, I'm a little bit at a loss here. Does anyone have suggestions they want to pitch? Giving a refund in an offline circumstance is kind of hard.
Yeah, find the original invoice you have printed out or send to the customer or something like that. You can see it and then calculate it or process it later once after the fact. And there's usually some kind of a record of what was originally charged. You'd use that, and then once you're back online, then process the refund through AvaTax. Yeah,
so if somebody brings back the receipt, that's a good reason to have the receipt, because then you could say, yeah, I was charged $9.98 of tax. Even if my cash register software has been updated and it rounds it up to the nearest dollar now, I want to give them back exactly $9.98 in tax.
Exactly.
I don't like having pennies that don't reconcile. That leads you to a Superman 3 sort of situation, right? Come on, man. Everybody loves Superman 3.
The best one with Richard Pryor.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That was just one of those great movies. Richard Pryor was totally having fun with it.
His speech on plastics was not to be missed.
Dude, I totally do not remember that now.
Yeah. When he first shows up dressed up as the general in the Jeep and they're giving Superman the... And that always puzzled me.
Yeah.
Superman knows Kryptonite is gonna kill him. He gets this rock that looks exactly like Kryptonite, and he like picks it up and is like, "Thank you," and super polite. I would have been like,
well, this is where I go to the Spaceballs thing. Evil will triumph because good is dumb. So hopefully your refunds are not going to be problematic like that. I would say if you're giving a refund in an offline situation, give people back what's on the receipt. If you can't verify the receipt, take the information down, reconcile it when you're back online. I just don't know a good way to do refunds offline. You could use the tax rate to calculate it, but the thing is that tax rates change. What happens if the original sale was 3 months ago and the tax rate has changed since then? You know, I just don't know a good way to handle it. So really, you know, whenever I've been in this circumstance, like the lady at the cash register will tell me, hey, why don't you go over there? My register's down, they'll help you out over on that one. You know, I don't know a good way to do it.
Well, it sounds like we have cases for business continuity, depending on your specific integration. Does that sound correct?
Mm-hmm. It's a tough question. Unfortunately, I'm running a bit out of time right now. I think we've just gone over. I want to thank you all for joining us for another Office Hours with AvaTax. I really appreciate hanging out with all of you, and I look forward to seeing you all at Crush DC next week in Washington, D.C. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us, Ted.
Thank you.
"Thank you."